Welcome to another Scoresheet podcast. Today I'm happy to say we have longtime Scoresheet player Brian Jones with us. Brian's not only played for years, but he's won a ton of league titles. He helps us out with some draft lists, and he's here to talk about lineup cards tonight. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you. I'm not sure I've ever had you on an actual podcast before.
I don't think you have.
Yeah, well, we'll rectify that and we'll do one right now. So now that we're 4 weeks into the season, we've had our first in-season draft. Maybe rather than talking about what players we should draft, it's time for more of the in-season strategies. So, there's trading, there's in-season drafts, but probably the biggest one for the next few weeks till the next draft anyhow is a lineup card. So I know you gave a talk at the Phoenix BBHQ Fantasy Sessions about lineup cards, so I figure you've got lots of nuggets for people.
Oh, hopefully I do. Hopefully, even if I'm playing it for a long time, there'll be at least one item that I mentioned, that people will say, "Huh, I hadn't thought about that."
Yeah, well, we also have lots of people that it's their first or second year playing Scoresheet, and I don't know if I'm not the best explainer in the world. I think there's definitely a learning curve. So why don't we start with the batting side, since that's the top of the web-based lineup form, and we'll just kind of do the columns. So the first thing is just simply your starting lineup versus right-handed pitchers and left-handed pitchers, just the names.
Yeah, the biggest mistakes I see with people who are just beginning with Scoresheet is they have the same lineup versus both lefties and righties, and that really isn't good, because you want to try to put your best hitters up at the top of your lineup, and rather than and your best hitters are not always going to be the same versus lefties and versus righties.
Yeah, I think that there's two parts of platooning. One is whether you actually have a guy listed, say, on the bench versus one type of pitcher and starting versus the other. And even if you don't do that too much, it's really hard to believe, unless you have 8 switch hitters, that you want the same batting order. Especially lefties traditionally hit left-handed pitchers really with a bad split. Their platoon split is bad for lefties against left-handed pitchers.
Yeah, now if you have someone like Joey Votto, that's going to be fine because he's going to hit well enough. But almost all other lefties, unless you're the top of the line lefty, you at the very least want to bat them farther down in the lineup. And if you have a decent right-handed hitter, you actually would want to put him on the bench and have the right-handed hitter playing. Right.
Platooning has kind of died out in the majors just because teams carry 13 pitchers now on average. They don't have enough players to platoon. But in Scoresheet, it's really hard to believe that you don't have at least your worst outfielder platooning. Everybody has a few righties and a couple lefties, or a few lefties and a couple righties in the outfield, or maybe 2 first basemen, 1 righty and 1 lefty. And we do have on the website, if you go to the Scoresheet.com homepage, there's a little navigation bar at the top, and on the far left it says Fantasy Baseball. If you click on that, you get a drop-down menu with a bunch of links. And you can click on the player list and rules link and get a link to a page called Platoon Splits, and you can see the actual platoon splits we use this year, because we do splits based on the players' last 2 years.
Yes, and I actually use that when I'm drafting, and that if my first couple of picks, if they're lefties, I then want to pick up a right-handed partner later on in the draft. It's easier to do it that way than to do it the opposite. It's a lot more difficult to pick up a right-handed hitter and then in the later rounds pick up a lefty to go with him.
Yeah, but at this point now we've kind of got our teams. But like I said, unless you really ended up with all righties or all lefties, platooning is certainly something that the experienced Scoresheet managers use to their advantage. So then the next column over is positions, which is somewhat self-explanatory, except that I find people, even some that have played for years, they think if a guy qualifies at a position mid-season, they don't need to put that position in the position box if they wanted to play there. But in fact, we figure the computer tries to play guys based on what you actually put in the position box. So if you have Zach Cozart and you really want him to play shortstop and second for you, you need to, instead of just having an SS there, put shortstop dash second base. You should list the positions for guys that you want them to play in the position box.
And you, on the weekly results, you list the players who qualified new positions, and you also have another link for all the players that have ever qualified at a new position for the year. So it's if you look at those, you can then update your lineup accordingly.
Yeah, you can remind yourself that Cozart qualified so far at second and third, along with his original shortstop, but Kyle Farmer hasn't qualified at third base yet. You won't see him on that list. Also, maybe the last thing about positions, just because a guy qualifies at a new position, you can still play him at the position he started the year at on the player list all of this season with that listed range.
And another item, you don't always have to list a player to position even though he qualifies. If you have a player who has a very bad range at, say, shortstop, but is a decent second baseman, you just don't list him at shortstop if you have other shortstops who can handle the job well.
Right. That's why we don't automatically fill in all the positions for a player in that box as soon as they qualify, because sometimes a guy will qualify midseason, like you said, at shortstop, but we'll give him a pretty lousy range. And in that case, you probably only want him playing short if you're literally out of all other shortstops, in which case the program will move him there.
Right, so you just don't want to list him at all.
Yeah. So moving on, let's see the steal column. I know you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, usually I would want to have at least guys who I think are going to steal 2/3 of the time. So I will look at the past year stats, and if they're stealing 2/3 or better, then I will give them the yes sign. Otherwise, I'll give them the no sign.
Right. And I mentioned earlier for platoon splits, we use their last 2 years' splits. So what I mean by that is if a guy gets a bonus of 25 points in batting average versus, say, right-handed pitchers, that's from the last 2 years, and then we take his stats for the week, and when he faces a righty in Scoresheet, if he had 300 for the week, we treat him as if he had 325. But that's basically pretty much the only stat we use from past seasons. So steals, for instance, when you say steal 2/3 of the time, what a guy did last year does not matter. It's what his percentage of successful steals are each week of this season.
It doesn't matter in the case of that they'll actually be able to steal the same rate in the past, but that's a good way to project it. That if there have been 2/3 last year, 2/3 the year before, they're probably going to be 2/3 going forward. On the other hand, if they only steal 50% of the time, they're not suddenly going to start stealing more than that.
Right. And the other thing about the steal column is when we have to do a little lineup juggling because one of your starters doesn't have enough playing time, first, if your first or second batter needs to be replaced, the program does its best to only move a guy into first or second spot if they have a Y in their steal column. So you can that'll affect how many Ys and Ns you give, I think.
Yeah, so if someone is borderline in steals, you may want to give them a yes if you want them to move to the top of the order.
Right. And speaking of top of the order, we kind of glossed over this, but I think what you really, I think having a guy that steals bases a lot in the first or second spot has kind of gone out of favor. What most major league managers and thus most Scoresheet managers want is the guy with the best on-base percentage at the top of the order. Billy Hamilton, it's great that he steals bases, but if he has a 292 on-base percentage, you really don't want him at the top of the order, whether Cincy wants to stick him there or not.
And really, you don't even really want him in your lineup, except maybe in the 8th spot.
Yeah. I mean, he plays good defense, and he does steal bases. So in some, you can think of it every time he gets a single, it's really a double. But you want a guy who walks at the top of your order. Because in theory, your big home run hitters are going to bat third and fourth for you, and you want someone on base for them. You don't, and especially in this day and age where there seems like there's as many home runs as singles. So the difference between being on first or second, if Aaron Judge is going to come up and hit a home run, you don't really care where the base runner is. He's still going to score on the home run.
Yeah, so usually I want 1-2 be good OBA, and then 3 and 4 would be more slugging and to a lesser extent OBA.
Right. Okay, and then sack bunts. Those have also kind of died out a little bit this year. Do you use many of those?
I do some. I would say that in a non-pitching league, this time maybe like one every 2 weeks or so, and that most of my players, the best players, I don't use it at all, so they're swinging away all the time. And then the lesser regulars, I might have an 8, so they're bunting in close games, in more crucial situations. Only for very bad players do I allow them to bunt in the first inning or even up to the fifth.
Yeah, I don't think I have anybody anymore bunting before the 7th or 8th inning, but I used to even have my good hitters bat in the 9th inning, and now I don't do that anymore. I have guys that I worry might hit into double plays. You know, a left-handed catcher versus a left-handed pitcher. I'll definitely want them bunting because just like a pitcher in real life, I'm more worried about him hitting to a double play than I am about giving up the out. But, yeah, I think just like in real life, the sack bunts among non-pitchers are about half as many as there used to be.
Yeah. I'm going to mention the Scoresheet program that you have on your website. This is something that can be, if you have the time, that'd be very useful to figure out your strategy, is play the game back for like one batter at a time and see, would you really want to be bunting here? Do you really want to be bringing in the relief pitcher? Do you really want to steal? So like this way, as you're playing the game, you might have a different idea than when you actually made up the lineup card, and then you can change your lineup card to match the way you want it to happen.
Right. You can do that with the score sheets we send out by email every week, or with the Scoresheet program. Either way, you want to go through your score sheet, and if you find yourself saying, "Why the heck did I bring this reliever in?" and then you need to change your lineup. Let's see. And the last one on the batting side is the pinch hit column, which, basically, if you put a number in versus that type of pitcher for a batter, he does not get pulled out of the game for a pinch hitter. And if he's on the bench, he will pinch hit. And if you give him a dash, he will get pulled out of the game for a pinch hitter, or he won't do any pinch hitting if he's on the bench except for a pitcher in the National League.
And just like listing players in your starting lineup, you don't want to have the pinch hit numbers be the same for the lefty and the righties.
No, if you have a left-handed batter, I mean, if he's one of your best hitters, you want to still give him a number. But I don't have very many left-handed batters even have a pinch hit number against left-handed pitchers, unless they're really a top player. I tend to want them to get pulled out for a right-handed hitter.
The other thing you need to be careful about is not having too many players without a pinch hit number. Because if you only have a few, especially if you're in a league without a DH, you will use up all your pinch hitters on hitting for position players, and then you're going to have player AAA come in to pinch hit for you.
Oh, that's a good point. So yeah, in the National League especially, you do want to have most of your guys probably have some number. But as you said, they can be different numbers versus right-handed pitchers and left-handed pitchers for the same player. And moving on to the pitching side.
Before we do that, one more item about defensive subs. I use some of them, but be careful about removing your really big bats. That if you have your hitters who are hitting 3 and 4 and are the heart of your lineup, but are a couple range points, I leave them in. I don't pull them because if I lose the lead and then I need to come back, I don't want to have the scrub defensive players in there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I list a couple of them. So let's see, the starting rotation, that's pretty self-explanatory. You list your best pitcher first, and down from there, I think, you can, because you can play games with who they face with the prefer to face column. So if I have Kershaw, I just plain list him first, and my second best pitcher second. You can, well, as you mentioned, there is if you keep track of unused starts, you can kind of move guys around based on that.
Yeah, that's one thing I do like to do, because otherwise the majority of your unused starts will go to your fifth starter, and I like to spread them around so that there's maybe a couple in the fifth starter, a couple in the fourth starter, a couple in the third starter. So I will shuffle my pitchers in order for that to occur.
Huh. Okay. And then Hook, I I think that well, there's a couple strategies. I don't know. I think five, a hook number for starting pitchers are around 5 or 5.5 is kind of standard. So what do you use to adjust that up or down?
I start with a 5.5 at the start of the season when I don't have much of a bullpen. But as the season goes along, I keep dropping it so that if I have a full rotation on my card plus more relievers on the bench, I might drop it down all the way to 4 or maybe even 3.5. Because my thinking is if the pitcher gets in trouble, I would rather pull him and go have more pitchers in order to take his place.
Right. I mean, that was always my original advice many, many years ago. The deeper your bullpen, the lower your hooks. If you've got a lot of injuries or you haven't drafted many relievers, you don't want to have low hooks, or else suddenly in the 5th inning you're liable to have pitcher AAA pitching, and that's a bad thing.
Something to remember is your 5th starter hooks are used for your spot starters.
When you pull a guy up from the bullpen, you mean?
Pull the guy from the bullpen. They'll use whoever you have listed in your 5th spot for the hook numbers.
Right. And then the hook for ace is different. If you have a really good closer, Kenley Jansen when he's pitching well, or Chapman when he's lights out, then I think you could have, you don't want to have a 1, I don't think. If your starting pitcher's giving up 0 or 1 runs in 8 innings, you probably want to trust him to pitch the 9th. But I use a 2 if I have a really good closer for most of my starters, because we do have a slight fatigue factor in Scoresheet where a pitcher will pitch slightly worse as the game goes on.
Yeah, I usually go 2 to 3. In that, with the way Major League Baseball is played today, pitchers usually do not pitch into the 8th. Starting pitchers don't pitch in the 8th or 9th unless they're doing an excellent job.
Right. That's why you don't want to take them out, because these days the hook for ace, if your closer doesn't come into the 8th inning, that doesn't come into play very much because your starter's probably gone in the 6th or 7th these days. As you said, if he's still pitching in the 8th or 9th inning, he's probably throwing a shutout in real life, or his manager would have yanked him. And then there's prefer to face. You have thoughts on that?
Yes, I use that quite a bit. What I do is I look early in the season. I look at a team who doesn't have platoon partners or whose big hitters are lefties, and then I'll prefer put the lefties against them. Other people will sometimes put their best pitcher versus whoever they think the best team is. I don't really see the point in that. I prefer to use it to get the best platoon advantage.
Until maybe September. If there's one team you're fighting with for a wild card or a division crown, then, I think, like, once again, if I have Kershaw, I'm going to slot him against a team that I'm tied for the division lead with. But yeah, for the first 5 months of the season, if there's a team that's full of left-handed mashers, that's who I'm going to put my left-handed starters to face. All right, and then in the bullpen, go ahead.
Before we do that, I want to talk about what are called starter eligible relievers. This is not really a lineup decision, but more of a draft decision. That you have players who are listed starter in the starter score sheet, but are actually being used in the major leagues in the bullpen. They are very useful because they can come in to start if you run out of actual starting pitchers. And I also end up I usually have 1 or 2 of them in my rotation by the middle of the season, because they are putting up someone like a Chad Green last year or a Brad Peacock are putting up really great numbers. They'll only give you 4 innings to start, but if you have a deep bullpen, they can really help you.
Yeah, you can do that. Starter reliever, they only pitch 3 or 4 innings, 4 at the most if they don't have a start in real life. And if they only pitched a couple innings in the majors that week, they're going to come out after a couple innings for you. But if you do have a deep bullpen, you can do it. Tony La Russa and a few other managers played with once in a while, and just kind of start a guy is only going to pitch 3 innings. So in the bullpen, when the program's looking for starters, it literally just reads down the names. All of those strategy numbers are only used for when the pitcher's used as a reliever. So when it's looking for a starter because one of your rotation guys didn't pitch, it just goes down the names and it uses the first one that had a start that week in real life. So you don't need to give your emergency starters, an earliest inning of 1 or a rank of 1 or anything else, all those numbers are just used for when they were a reliever. You just want to list the names in the order you want them to use if they're pulled up as a starter. And then hooks for your bullpen, I assume you use much lower hooks than you do for starters.
Yes, usually they are usually around a 2, maybe a 1.5 or a 1 for lefties, someone who might be considered a lefty specialist. And then 3 or 4 if I have starters that are listed in the bullpen.
Yeah, and then earliest inning, if you give them a 6 or later, they're considered a setup man by the program, and they won't pitch if you're behind by more than 3 runs or ahead by more than, I believe it's 5, because we try to save them for somewhat more crucial situations. So you don't want to list too many guys with an earliest inning of 6, 7, or 8, or 9, or you're going to run out of pitchers because they won't ever pitch in a game where you're behind by 4 runs. But other than that, I think it's kind of common sense, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, usually I list 2, at the most 3 setup guys with a early scene of 6. The other relievers I list at 4, and the starters and the starter eligibles I list at 1.
Yeah, and then for the rank, the program only looks at the first guy coming in, so I generally don't change my rank versus right-handed batter and left-handed batter by more than a couple numbers. And I don't give a guy a 9 versus right-handed batters and a 2 versus left-handed very often because the program only looks at that one batter. It's not like a real manager where you might see 3 lefties coming up in a row. But I do, if I have pitchers that are of somewhat equal ability and one's lefty and one's righty, I certainly give the lefty a better rank against left-handed batters.
I'm a bit more extreme than that because I think that a lot of Scoresheet players go heavily into platoons, and so in that case, their lineup is if you're facing one lefty, there's going to be other lefties beyond that because they're platooning and they're going to have maybe 4 or 5 lefties.
Huh. All right. I'll have to take that into account. And then closer. There are some people that just don't like using closers. They're afraid that their closer has a bad game in real life. He's going to lose 3 games for him in Scoresheet. But real life managers use them. I think I like to protect my 2-to-1 lead.
I always use a closer because I think I have the judgment of who my best pitcher is rather than leaving it up to the computer.
Yeah, the other thing is closers automatically come in for bullpen pitchers if it's a save situation and they have playing time and they've hit their earliest inning. And as we talked about, most starters these days don't go to the 8th or 9th inning. So probably when your closer's earliest inning is reached, you've got a bullpen guy going. And if you don't have a closer listed, that bullpen guy goes until he hits his hook. If you have a closer listed and maybe your 5th best reliever's pitching, you want Canley Jansen to come in automatically and replace him, I would think.
Well, most seasons, maybe not so far.
Yeah, maybe not. Yeah, the first 2 weeks of this year. But I think, like you said, you want to be in control and you want to tell the program who your best pitcher is for the 9th inning, not have it kind of pick somebody.
And then I usually have I have 1 closer and coming in the 8th. And that I think if you have more than 1 closer, you're wasting innings because they're not going to get used as much. Yeah,
no, I agree. Once in a great while I have 2, and if I do that, I usually give the second best one an earliest inning a 7. But then if he's the second best, he's liable to blow the lead. I like you. Unless I really have somehow the 2 best closers in the league, I list 1, and then my second best pitcher gets a rank of 1 in the bullpen and an earliest inning of 6.
What I like is then having I have 2 setup guys, 1 lefty and 1 righty, so that again, depending on the platoon, I'll use the lefty versus lefty lineups and the righty versus the righty lineups.
That makes sense. Well, we've talked for 20 minutes about lineups. Hopefully somebody out there, whether it's their first year or they've played for 15 or 20 years, hopefully one of these things you said or I said will make them think a little differently.
Yeah, I hope so. In that there's still more to learn about Scoresheet. I've been playing it for a long, long time.
You have, and you've had a lot of success. But no, I think for a lot of it, there's just no one right or wrong way. It greatly depends on the makeup of your team.
And yes, even with the makeup team, there isn't really a lot of these things. There isn't a right answer. It's more of an art of how do you feel. And then sometimes, just like road managers, the decision you make can look great or it can blow up in your face.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean the decision was wrong. It would just didn't work out.
But the good news is, unless you have a partner you share your team with, if you make a bad decision, you don't get fired.
True.
Yeah. Well, Brian, thanks, and we'll do this again pretty soon.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff.
All right.